Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Zach Smith, Minister Sports, on with us. Let's talk a little Ohio State defensive coordinator opening right now. Let's start with this. And before we were just talking about it off air. Too many Buckeyes fans pissed off in the comments. Talk about the loss of Jim Knowles. Just, if you want to go into like why or what or going to a rival, like that's all fine too. But just from a football perspective, just the loss of Knowles.
Yeah, I think it's massive. The guy, he got hired and got paid more than anyone else in the country to come in and fix the defense, and he did it. He did it in a masterful way. They were the best defense in the country statistically this past year, loaded roster, and they won a national championship. Like, that was when Ryan Day had to make a decision. He fired Kerry Combs. He said, we need to have one of the best defenses in the country. If we do, we'll win a national championship. He went out and just targeted Jim Knowles, stole him from Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State, and it was perfect calculation, paid off, worked perfectly, and they won it all. So, like, what better hire could there be? What better job could Jim Knowles do? So it's going to be a big loss. Now, it'll be interesting to see, like anything else. I talk about it all the time. The biggest difference between Nick Saban and every other coach that has won a couple natties is he almost always hit a home run when a guy left. He'd make another hire. You're like, shit, that was a great hire. And that's how he won so many. And that's where Urban failed. Urban won one at Florida. Actually, won two at Florida, and then lost a bunch of coaches like Dan Mullen, made some bad hires and never got back there. Right at Ohio State, won the national championship, lost a couple coaches, never got back. It'll be interesting to see what Ryan Day does. Now, why Jim Knowles left? I know you can buy all the bullshit. Oh, I'm a Pennsylvania guy. I wanted to go to Penn State. Like, okay, sounds good. You literally have the best defense in the country, a lot of talent returning. His raise was going to be 2.7 or 2.8 million a year, and Penn State offered 3.1. Without question, Ohio State would have just matched that. It's not like that $300,000 was going to cost them their D coordinator. I think he didn't get along with Ryan Day, and from things that I've heard, he didn't like how Ryan Day kind of had unfair treatment of coaches. Certain coaches that recruit well, got stroked off, and certain coaches that Jim felt were better coaches than the guys who get all the praise were getting kind of disrespected. And it got to the point where after the Oregon game, Ryan kind of had a not a falling out, but they had a pretty controversial interaction. And Jim Knowles was like, no, I can't with this guy. And so they won the national championship. And he said, you know what? I got an opportunity here. I'll be 7-hour round trip drive from my family. So I guess he could make it home for a weekend, maybe not for dinner. That's for sure. But it just made sense. And I think this stuff happens. They might lose their O-line coach, Justin Fry, to the Bears now. Chip Kelly's rumored to every OC job in the NFL. When teams win national championships, coaches and players move on, right? Guys leave early that maybe wouldn't have left early if they didn't win it all. Coaches get opportunities. It just happens. And if you want to have even a mini dynasty, right? Like a Clemson or Georgia, which you can't compare to Nick Saban's, but that was a hot 5 years for those two schools. You got to make the hires. You got to replace great coaches with other great coaches. And I think the plan right now is for Ryan to elevate. I think Matt Guerrieri, who was Jim Knowles' kind of protege, who was coaching the safeties, I think he'll want to elevate him. I don't know what that means for the rest of the staff because he's a young guy, kind of was the late addition to the defensive staff. You might see Larry Johnson retire, Tim Walton go back to the NFL. There's going to be a lot of change at Ohio State, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I don't know if you're super familiar with this, but when you just mentioned that, it kind of reminds me of Florida brought in Austin Armstrong, who was like super, super young. And then they almost felt like they needed a babysitter for him. So they brought in Ron Roberts from Auburn and kind of had Ron Roberts like co-DC. The jokes we made as Florida State guys was like they brought in a babysitter for him. Austin Armstrong no longer there. He's at Houston, and Ron Roberts still with Sinceri coming in to be a co-DC. Seems to be the babysitter for the young guys. I won't make the babysitter joke, but could you see a situation where that is, if they elevate him to DC, they kind of bring in somebody that is more established to help out with that?
I don't know, because if they're going to retain him, it's because they want to retain Jim Knowles' defense philosophically. And it's such a uniquely different defensive scheme. It is very different, but the equivalent of Brent Venables' system, where it's like, that's so bizarrely different from normal defensive football that you kind of got to be like of that lineage or of that genealogy to run it, and not that you can't have input. What I think they should do, because when you really look into Matt Guerrieri, he's a young, square white dude, right? Like the reports back him, it doesn't really relate well to players, like doesn't have a lot of relationships, really smart. So like his position players, Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, they love him because they got better because he had such a good football mind and really understood football. I think they're going to need a recruiter. I mean, you got Larry Johnson, who's getting a little bit older, still the GOAT D-line coach. You have Tim Walton, who's been a stud recruiter. James Laurinaitis hasn't yet, but we all kind of know it's James Laurinaitis. Like, how does he not recruit well? I think you need to go get a guy to coach safeties with Matt G and get an ace recruiter. Get somebody that can go down to Florida and pull a Jeremiah Smith on defense or something, just go land those big fish, because Jim Knowles wasn't great recruiting. Matt G hasn't been great recruiting. I think they need another big time recruiter. And if he is as smart as Ryan Day told us he was at the national championship celebration, he shouldn't need a babysitter for the scheme side.
Yeah. What you mentioned offense, and just really quickly, do you and Chip will get mentioned obviously for every NFL job for the rest of until he either takes one or hangs it up. And then even then, we still see message boards with Gruden's name on it at times. So even when they do retire, it never stops. But do you think the offensive side stays pretty intact? I mean, Hartline's name gets thrown around every year too. Do you think the offensive side stays together?
Yeah, I mean, outside of Justin Fry, I think might go to the Bears. And Chip, that's a wild card always. But yeah, I mean, I think Laughlin's back at running backs coach. His first year here, did an unbelievable job with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. Hartline is a guy. Hartline's an interesting case study, right? Because he's kind of hit his head on the ceiling, unless he's going to go actually coordinate. And Ryan already tried that. He promoted him, made him the coordinator. It didn't go well in the spring. He wasn't a good coordinator. Ryan had to take back the play calling duties and then brought in Chip Kelly, right, a year later. So Hartline's making over $1 million. He literally is untouchable in Columbus. I mean, with what he has done in recruiting and the NFL talent he's putting out and the production, and it's his alma mater, like I just don't see him leaving unless he were to get a head coaching job, like at a place, a Purdue or somewhere.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's going to go the coordinator route, because I don't think he's any good at it, honestly. And he could learn, he could get better. He might be the best coordinator that ever lived at some point. But right now, I just don't see him leaving. So I think outside of Chip and the O-line coach, Justin Fry, I think the offense is going to stay intact.
You look at him too, Brian, and you just think like, man, with all the stress, like you see coordinators sometimes jumping down, or coaches jumping down to coordinator, like Chip Kelly, Gus Malzahn, others that have kind of done this. Like, is making $1 million a year at your alma mater and the machine that he's built at wide receiver. And I'm not saying he doesn't have to put work into recruiting guys, but it's a little easier for him to recruit a wide receiver right now than anybody else. Maybe a lot easier. It's not a bad gig, right?
No, not at all. I mean, he was, if you really look at how everything happened, first and foremost, he has done an exceptional job recruiting. He's one of, if not the best recruiters in college football, but he really hit it at a great time. I mean, he took over a room. He had to learn how to run a room. He had to learn how to recruit. I mean, he could always talk. He could sell. Like, he is very charismatic, smart dude. But he took over a room with like 3 team captains, senior laden. Like, it was somewhat on autopilot as he learned the ropes in running a receiver room. He also had 3 first-round draft picks committed to him in Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jamison Williams. And so it was like he had that. And the best part of all of it was we went from JT Barrett, who was a fullback playing quarterback, to Dwayne Haskins, a precision passer. So all that happened, and he was able to capitalize on it and take it to a height I didn't even know possible. And so, like you said, he's kind of got it cooking. They're going to have an NFL quarterback every year. The pedigrees, there's not a pedigree in the country that can outshine Ohio State's last 5 years at the receiver position, and they get the ball. Like, that's where you look at some of these receivers Michigan's recruiting, or some of these schools that don't throw it. It's like, yeah, these kids are selfish. They want the ball.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah doing what he did kind of silenced what had been the one negative on Hartline is young kids don't play. Like, seniors will start over freshmen. Jeremiah came in and it was like, no, see? Now, don't get me wrong, he's different, but at least gives him that talking point. Like, no, that's not true. You just got to be a dude like Jeremiah Smith, and you'll come in day one and you can play.
Yeah. Appreciate you tuning into College Football Addiction. Appreciate Zach Smith from Minnesota Sports for taking a few minutes and chatting with us. If you haven't already, make sure you click the link in the description and go subscribe to his channel. If you're a Buckeyes fan, if you're a fan of any team in the Big Ten, if you're just a college football fan in general, his content is some of the best here on YouTube. We'd love if you did the same here, but again, I'm not asking for myself. Go make sure you're subscribed to Menace to Sports. Appreciate Zach. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon on College Football Addiction.